Um, all right, we are going to introduce our next panel and moderator. I see Lawrence walking up. Uh, Lawrence is the former AI advocacy lead at Google, but he also is the chief AI officer for a multinational movie studio whose aim is to revolutionize the process of making movies. He and the panelists will cover the best practices for integrating LLMs into enterprise workflows, addressing safety concerns, and comparing pre-built solutions with custom models and evaluating budget-friendly LLM options. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Alrighty, I'd just like to welcome up the panelists. Vanessa, Graham, Milos, Ed, Ben, come on up and grab a chair. I think there's a microphone on each chair. Guess I'll be standing. Alrighty. So what we're going to be spending the next roughly 40 minutes talking about is really LLMs in the enterprise and making them work. And we were discussing this amongst ourselves yesterday, and we realized that, the term making them work in the enterprise is somewhat overloaded. So we kind of want to drill down into two different ways of thinking about it. The first one, of course, is the technical way of thinking about it. What does it take to deploy an LLM? What does it take to build applications on it? And then the second one is really the more intangible, making it work for you. Anybody remember the movie Jurassic Park? And remember, Jeff Goldblum had that famous line in it, was we spend all this time thinking about whether we can instead of whether we should. And I think what we'd like to be kind of really digging into a lot in this panel is that as well, is hey, LLMs, throw them into the enterprise and see what happens. That's not really what we want to do. We want to think about, whether we should be doing this, and if we should, then how we're going to be doing it. So let's start by introducing our panelists. Graham, why don't you go first, and then we'll go down the line.
Hi, Graham Lipschitz, former lives at Google, builder AI. Just come out of an ed tech that's trying to be Netflix for skills. So imagine watching Friends and you're a better friend. I am at Duke Corporate Education, and I head up partnerships and digital learning, basically thinking how and what our leaders of today are learning and how that's going to change tomorrow.
Milos?
Hey, my name is Milos Kopi. I'm representing Allegro, which is a marketplace e-commerce platform in Central Europe. To briefly introduce you with what we are facing right there, we have about 20 million of active users, 500 million of active offers on the platform, and tens of thousands transactions daily. And I'm responsible for the team that supports our company with tools that allow us to prevent from frauds right there, supports our customer service, provide compliance in terms of the content we are posting on the platform. So we have a pretty big scale right there to handle.
Sounds like it. Vanessa?
So I'm Vanessa, machine learning engineer. I work at the European Central Bank, and I have a background in computer science, engineering, and specialization in machine learning. I basically build models and bring them to production setups, and now integrating Gen AI things. So handing over to the next one.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ben Gutkovich. I'm co-founder of Superlinked. All our goal, it's a startup, recently raised $9.5 million from Index Ventures in the US. Our goal is to help enterprises work with large language models and generative AI models by combining structured and unstructured data in the same embedding space, so you don't need to build any filters, custom models, etc. And you can use the vector search to solve hard problems.
Hi everyone. Well, that's bad. My name's Ed Chalice. I head up AI strategy at UiPath. UiPath is a business automation platform. We help large businesses automate tasks. My background's in AI research. I founded a company in this space, the UiPath acquired, so I've been on research and business development and solving real enterprise problems with this tech for my whole career.
Cool. So why don't we just get right down into, say, the technical stuff and getting started with that, and deploying and running these LLMs in production. Vanessa, how about what's it like working with this in finance?
Sure. So there's numerous use cases because the IP is all there, even at ECB, and there's use cases from summarization or to the normal chatbot. But I'm here could mention a very good use case that is for to help streamlining the drafting of evaluation reports. And so basically the supervisors, they receive thousands of documents from more than 100 banks, and they need to find the important information from those to assess, to evaluate those banks for different risks, and then take that and make a final assessment themselves that then is used to evaluate those banks. In the end, by using LLMs in this workflow, we could help streamline all this process because it helps standardizing and making all those reports much more consistent, because those reports are written in different formats with different writing styles, which can introduce bias. So these hopefully also help solving that bias problem and make sure that all the reports then in the end have the same format and are much easy to digest and to make assessments on. And then, of course, to streamline the process and make everything much faster. To also avoid missing important information. And that then brings to the technicalities of how this is made possible, because these are thousands, millions of documents, and we need to have there a very sound vector database as well that then we use to store all the unstructured and structured data to make it very easy for the supervisors to access that and then start drafting and providing the right information to the LLM to support with all that drafting.
I'm really glad you said going beyond the chatbot, right? Because it's we really want to be going beyond chatbots with LLMs now. But also heard Vanessa say structured and unstructured a lot. I think that's right in your wheelhouse, Ben, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's this old adage in definitely machine learning, the quality of the results is really dependent on the quality of the data you feed into it. And LLMs are amazing, right? And they open amazing capabilities, especially with unstructured data. So images, video, long text documents, amazing, right? But enterprises in the end run on structured data, right? You have stock levels, you have user spend, you have user tiers, you have addresses, right, locations, and LLMs don't handle those well, right? Try to feed a document that was created, a month ago, and ask LLM to bring you documents that are fresher than 2 weeks, you might get that document as well, because they don't have the concept of now and what is the 30th of May 2024 is, right? So where we help clients is to bring those two types of data into the same vector space. The way it's currently resolved is you either put all your data into LLM, maybe using LangChain, for example, to structure it somewhat, and then you just hope that it will work, right? You're like, well, hopefully the LLM will understand that this is old and this is new data. The other approach is, okay, I'll use unstructured, and we actually had a few chats here at the conference with people about this. We'll have our unstructured data fed into the LLM, but once we get the candidates from the LLM for the result, we'll re-rank it or filter it based on our structured data. So we'll use both. Right. But first of all, it's quite expensive to build those re-ranking models, to maintain them, and actually pretty complex. And you don't want to get all the results from the LLM. You might want to get the top 100 results. What if your best result is not within that 100? Get 1,000, but then it costs more and the performance is impacted. So there's a lot of use cases for LLMs beyond chatbot, for sure. Fraud detection, analytics, obviously search and recommender systems, but they depend on the data you feed into those LLMs and how you feed it.
So Miloš, I hear fraud detection, I hear structured and unstructured data, and I think this is everything that you have to deal with in retail, yes, right?
Ben said everything. I'm just joking. You said something beyond the obvious chatbot. Actually, in our organization, the conversational usage of LLMs is quite controversial because we are approaching very carefully to every application of especially non-deterministic tools, on customer-facing side. So I have much more examples from beyond the chatbot than chatbot. But coming back to your question, we developed our own LLMs for machine translation. So I said models because for each pair of languages we have at least 3 pairs of models, each for another purpose. For example, when we are translating the offer or product description, there is one kind of model. Another kind is for translating titles, because this is quite specific kind of construct. And another type of translations is within the conversation between customer and merchant. So that's why we are using much more models than only one. And the other use case where we are using large language models is fact checking. So on the help path, we have a few features consist of classic machine learning models, like multi-class classification. And we are trying to find the best answer for our customers. But the last line, let's say so, of defense is question answering. And we are trying to suggest the most relevant help article we have in our knowledge base. And we use their LLMs just to check whether in this article is question for that specific inquiry from the customer side. We are also streamlining the way of writing reviews on our platform, because it's something that is important for marketplaces to have a lot of reviews to each of products, but customers are not happy when they need to write something, so we are trying to streamline that with LLMs. And as Ben also said, LLMs are also very good in extracting data for analytical purpose, especially in projects where we don't have a clear business justification to engage people or human annotators to prepare good quality data. And I think we have much more. One is worth to mention. We also using LLMs for creating synthetic data for evaluating our agentic systems. So, for example, the RAG systems. So we create some kind of synthetic data sets that evaluate the capabilities of reasoning, retrievers, and so on.
So, a lot of new concepts coming thick and fast. NLP, synthetic data, structured data, unstructured data, LLMs. Graham, how do people learn? your area is education, and like what is it? How do you help people learn?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the use case of the LLM is incredible, right? I think about my daughter. You ask my daughter to write down her times table, and she's terrible at it. But if you get her to say it to you, she's excellent. She barely gets a thing wrong. And what we're starting to realize is that LLMs for learning allow us to create hyper-personalized learning journeys. People can learn what they want when they want it in ways that they want it to. So that kind of like fit-in or F-off style of schooling is going to totally be revolutionized by an LLM. And so what we're seeing is, obviously, the idea that, the data you put in is as good as the results you get out is, if we stick in really great curriculum at the start and power this LLM with this really excellent data, we're starting to get a level of education, of customized education, which is, far surpasses, what we're seeing in normal institutions today. So that's a really interesting one for us. I mean, in our business, which is halfway between a consultancy and a university, that then means that we can solve some of those burning questions that our customers have, and also include a lot of IP from our 1,500 faculty. So that's a very interesting mix for us.
Wow, yeah. So had we had this panel this time last year, we'd probably be talking about chatbots, right? Now we're talking about a lot more. RAG has become part of the lexicon. Structured, unstructured data we've been talking about a lot. Ed, your job is really strategy and looking ahead for the next 3, 5, 10 years or whatever. Where do you foresee, like if we were doing this panel this time next year, what would we be talking about, or what are the important things that you think we should consider?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think there's things that we know, right? So like you can make predictions with like a high degree of certainty. So these models are going to become, increasingly multimodal. The multimodal performance will get better and better. We see that GPT-O, right? But it's still not quite there. The fidelity, more modes will be added. I think one of the most exciting modes will be taking actions. Like it's actually it's like a mode, right? So people are talking about, and this is what we're working on at UiPath, is large action models. So models that both can perceive but take an action to change the state of the environment. And that's particularly relevant in the world of software, right? And I think, we're over-indexed on the chat use case. And I always draw on this analogy as like, how much would you pay for an assistant which refused to do any work? They just said, I will just talk to you, and we're kind of at that stage today, and you can give them access to a limited number of tools, so you can define a few tools, but if you have to index every tool that you give it, it's fundamentally constrained. So we need these models to be able to take actions on every website, on every application. And I think, ultimately, if you look at the statistics, I'd be interested to know what proportion of the calls to OpenAI servers come from a chat interface, and what proportion are coming from like the back end of a data pipeline or a piece of code. And I would guess that in 5 or 10 years' time, it would be like 99.9%. So basically, all software will have intelligence baked into it via this kind of capability. How it will evolve, I don't think we know, because I think there's a huge gap between the capability and the product design kind of UI product, conception. So we haven't actually had enough time and enough cycles of experimentation to build the cool new products you could build with just this tool.
Yeah, I think personally, I think one of the keys to that, building these new products, is a change in focus. Even the term that we use today is generative AI. And if we kind of box ourselves just into generative AI, we're actually missing a lot of the possibilities that these models and the foundation models give us. I always like to call the approach that we're taking, I call it artificial understanding as opposed to artificial intelligence. Because now if we start looking at the models and have them recede into the background and have them just be engines of understanding, then we can start doing really interesting new things with them. I'm really glad everybody spoke about structured and unstructured data. One of the biggest challenges my new venture has is structuring highly unstructured data. A movie screenplay is extremely unstructured. A lot of the data and a lot of the intelligence we have about how to make a movie and the things that we need to do while making a movie is extremely unstructured. One piece of data that I found that I'm trying to build into a data science model was the habits of different actors. There was one A-list actor in Hollywood who, if you put anything other than red M&Ms in his trailer, he will walk off the lot for the day. And if you lose one day of this actor, that's probably $1 million down the drain, and eliminating waste like that. And can we start using models, and can we start using LLMs, to work with the unstructured data that we have, to have that artificial understanding, to turn that into new data sets that are structured that we can then train on. And that's one of the things I'm really fascinated with and I'm trying to wrestle with. But then when it comes to these models, and what I'm really interested in for the panel is, I find it falls into 3 different types, right? There's the model that's built by somebody else and hosted by somebody else, like a GPT or a Cohere or a Gemini from Google. There's the model that is built by somebody else but hosted by you. Like maybe you take Llama and you put it into your data center and you might RAG on it or something like that. And then there's the model that's built by you and hosted by you, right? So obviously much more difficult, much more expensive. Across this spectrum, like I'm really curious, like, you know, what each of you have done in this space and what you think about it. Maybe starting with Ed, what are your thoughts on this and trends? And I know Apple dropped a bombshell this week with like how they're hosting GPT in the cloud. And
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's a whole spectrum of cognitive tasks, from quite simple cognitive tasks to really complex cognitive tasks. And I think you want to use the model, you know, that's economical for the task at hand. And so I think intelligence is going to be embedded in everything. And you know, different applications have different requirements around latency. Like, you know, you'll have machines that will be building stuff and you don't want to be sending stuff to a server. And privacy and security, you know, like when, you know, bad actors can be nation states, that's a really big situation. So, like, I think there's just a whole spectrum of cognitive tasks, and luckily there's also a whole spectrum of models and how computational complex they are and how much they cost to run. So I think we're going to see everything. It's not going to be an all or nothing. And you also don't necessarily need a model that's processing invoices to know about molecular biology or the complete work of, you know, Keats. So,
yeah.
Horses for courses.
Write me a haiku about my invoice. and Ben, I know you're the vector guy, and I keep talking about models. Sorry, I don't mean to leave you out. But it's the same thing. How do you think about, like, you know, vectors and the intelligence behind them to be able to do semantic searches, etc.? How will that change, hosting-wise?
Yeah, absolutely. So just in terms of model hosting, what we see with the clients is in POC phases, you go for the simplest one, right? You don't have a lot of requests. You might use a hosted open source model or maybe OpenAI API, but when you need to go to scale, then you probably go with a model that you host, because it's just cheaper, right? Because OpenAI API calls don't scale as well as AWS or GCP compute, right? For vector embeddings, it's about the vector databases, and again, it's very similar. So in the development phase, MVP phase, a lot of clients opt for Quadrant, for example, which is an open source. It's easy to deploy. They play with it. They see that it works. And then when they go to production, it very much depends on, again, the use case, right? What is the task? How important the speed is? All this balance between speed, scale, and cost, of course. You know, Redis is one of the partners we work with. If you want a real-time use case, you probably want to go for their solution, which also is scalable. So you want it hosted by them. If you want if you don't care as much about speed, then yeah, maybe you can just host your own Quadrant vector database and you know, don't spend too much on that.
Right. So it's Vanessa in banking, right? Hallucination. I mean, you probably have the hardest job out of all of us. Like, I would hate any of us, I'm sure, would love to have our bank account hallucinated. So what is it that you do? Like, what is your strategy there around, like, hosting models and making sure that things like that don't happen?
So we are actually going on a phased way there. So the hype is a lot, and the users wanted to start using the power of LLMs as soon as possible as well. So we're starting with something hosted somewhere else, so with OpenAI, and we are bringing that in a secured environment and with all the we're avoiding any issues about using the data that the users are sharing to then use it for training. So trying to avoid all that with proper contracts with Microsoft and so on. And so, like, this is where we are starting. We already allow our users to use that for drafting emails for the daily tasks, but really going beyond and also integrating RAG pipelines so that they can browse through a huge scope of 8 million documents and find the information in a smart way. And here comes, of course, big challenges, and I would say two main challenges with that. First, having the data that is relevant properly filtered, and for that, I think we shouldn't shouldn't think actually on, it's not LLM job to do that, it's actually on the clustering and on the retrieval part. So what I really think we should do is to empower smaller language models, maybe through the usage of data from LLMs, but really empower smaller models to have a smart filtering and maybe help finding all the documents about a given institution, because we build a model that is trained to find everything about a significant institution A, B, and C. And then also the embeddings model is essential to be as good as possible, and we are also moving towards that. And in the end, after having, what we really need to have is to know the domain, or to allow our pipeline to understand the domain, the intent, and the specificities of the user query that links with what you're saying about having all the metadata available, and then knowing how to connect that with the query that the user is making. And then the second part, when sent to the LLM also needs to know that understanding, needs to know that knowledge behind the context that is receiving. And for that, from what I've seen, I don't think that GPT-4, like just with prompt engineering, is enough. So I would really move towards our third example that you said about fine-tuning open source LLMs. Mm-hmm. And I can also say that in we are in experimental phase, but we've seen and we've got feedback, very good positive feedback with the business on an experiment of fine-tuning and telemetry for a cyber risk use case. And there, can really say that the answer from the business was it's fit for purpose. It outperforms GPT-4 during those UAT tests to fit the proper context and template the terminology from supervisors and really get it in exactly the way it was expecting, they were expecting. And this is exactly, I think, the way we should go through. And I think it also depends on different use cases. Maybe some don't need so much powerful models, others need, and so we need to fit for the right use case.
I really like you said fit for purpose, yeah. Right? And smaller models, because I do agree, I believe that's where the trend is going, that smaller, highly focused on a particular task model. And that sounds a lot like what Miloš was saying earlier on as well, like with translation models and recommenders and all of that kind of thing. And so what do you do as far as like hosting is concerned?
Okay, actually we are going all three ways at the same time, I would say. And it depends of the use case. For example, with these machine learning models, we are hosting them in our own data centers because of the number of because of the volume of data. And we are also using third-party providers models hosted in cloud. But we started from using open source in our data center. But after that, we adjusted with our legal department and our cloud providers partners provide us with a separated environment that is compliant with EU regulations. So right now we can use for example, GCP or Azure for some kind of proof of concept for smaller projects that there is no justify for building dedicated models.
Okay. And how about then in education, Graham? Was like dedicated models or using off the shelf or?
We went with a third party hosted in the cloud, which was fabulous for us starting out. And I guess for us, what was important were a few things. I think it's great that Vanessa mentioned hallucination. For us to have a teacher hallucinate is is a bit problematic. So we went with a solution that has a 0% hallucination rate, and when it doesn't know the answer, it says, "I don't know the answer," which. You would think that would be the norm, but sadly it's not. We went with something that was SOC 2 compliant. We went with something that would encrypt our data. But most importantly, the cost was really low. So by going with this third party, I think we ended up paying something like $100 a month for the solution. And when we employed it in our business, it saved our sales team, which is responsible for about $50 million of revenue, 30% of their time. So the kind of benefits you can derive from something like this with those kind of numbers are incredible.
Right. So if we then pivot from what we've learned about the past to how we're going to predict the future. And that's what machine learning is all about, right? Learning from your data to predict like what's coming next. Or how do you think, Graham, like just thinking from the educational perspective and using models like this, is that solution enough, or do you foresee yourselves pushing it further forward and saving even more or being even more productive?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg, really. We can go so much further, and I loved what Ed was saying about things being a bit more multimodal. Especially with thinking about how people learn, right? Taking it more into the verbal space, the graphical space. I was saying to someone at the lunch break, wouldn't it be great to learn in a pub quiz style? So the avenues we can go on are vast. When you see what folks like Microsoft are doing with regards to face and voice cloning, can you imagine the scale at which we can take professors and their ideas and put them in different languages, adapt them to different cultures? If you think about the democratization of education, we're only really starting to scratch the surface of that now with how these models are going.
Yeah, actually, if you go onto YouTube, you'll find videos of me speaking fluent Spanish and Chinese that were completely deep-faked of some of my AI lessons and stuff like that, done in that way. It's not quite there yet. There's a little bit of an uncanny valley, but maybe I see it because I'm looking at myself. I'd be curious if feedback from anybody else. But it is something that's really powerful where like a few minutes of video can be with the speaker deep faking moving of their lips with a language and synthesizing their voice in another language for like tens of dollars. Right, whereas to hire somebody else in to do that and to refund the whole thing would be thousands of dollars. So definitely see like a great future there. How about in retail, Milos? Where do you see like the use of these languages going?
As I'm responsible for creating a safe environment for our customers and merchants, I would like to address the socio-technical frauds better, because we are handling them right now, but the heuristic way with classical machine learning models. But I believe that large language models could be a game changer right there, because they could understand the sense of long history of message between customers and merchants. So that's one point I would like to address in near future. And the second one, I would like to move towards more autonomous decision making, but to build the solutions that consist of traditional machine learning model from heuristics, from LLMs, and with the software that orchestrates them all to make decision making instead of humans in our company.
Cool. And then Vanessa, banking, I'm sure there's a million ways that it could evolve. What do you think are your favorites? So where do you see it most importantly?
A lot of use cases and a lot of different businesses, even internally at the ACB, requesting different types of customization. So I see that we are going towards tailored solutions to these different types of use cases as well. Then I also see hybrid solutions. I think you really should go for that, because cost efficient and the environmental also concerns also ask for that. I think we should really take that into consideration. And then AGI, and I can say from the ultimate, or from our ultimate business representative, I can cite Elizabeth McCall from the supervisory board, where the vision is to bring these models and these solutions to edge devices so that the supervisors can have everything at their fingertips. So it's really something that it's a vision. It's on the next steps, on the future, and we've even seen from Apple as well last days that they're also having everything running on the device, and maybe only the things that are really more demanding can go to the cloud. So we're also open to ideas there, and also, of course, always following the AI Act and complying, because we need to make sure that we are compliant and we build towards that. Yeah.
Okay. And then understanding where the compliance direction is going, right, and
exactly.
being able to prepare for that, absolutely. So Ben, vectors, I mean, do they have a future?
Well, vector embeddings are the language of LLMs.
Exactly.
Right? So yes, definitely. But I agree with the other speakers here, and we see the more of a cross-cut of use cases across different industries and across different use cases. And a lot of companies are now experimenting and in POC phase. And one of the challenges is obviously capability to build those solutions. That's one significant bottleneck. The other one is kind of concerns on hallucination and control and ability to actually explain explainability. But all those fields are developing, right? So LLMs are getting more powerful. There are startups that work on LLM explainability, observability, that is also required by compliance, for example. Why did you reject this person from getting a loan? Right? If you said LLM told me, the regulators won't like it that much. But those things will get resolved in the next kind of 2, 3, 5 years. And so, yeah, I think the future of LLMs and vector embeddings with them is pretty bright.
I completely agree with you, and I made it a loaded question because as context windows are getting bigger and bigger, and they seem to be increasing exponentially, right? Gemini now announcing the 2 million token context window. A lot of people are claiming RAG is dead, but it's not, right? I think it's important to remember that, and I totally agree with you. And then Ed, wrapping us up, strategic vision, any thoughts on the future of LLMs in the enterprise? Where do you think people maybe should invest their time?
I think every business who has a strategic transformation program or something, business problems aren't typically like tech problems, right? Maybe an innovation team is looking to shoehorn an LLM in somewhere, but most people have growth, they want to scale growth, they want to increase margin, they want better customer experiences, and in all of those things you just need to look at that problem and also bring the LLM tool to that, right? But just to summarize, what I kind of think is this really interesting tension between traditional logic-based software, which has loads, you made that joke, which is do you want your bank to hallucinate your balance? It's I think that's a great joke because because there's places where you only want logic. You don't want any interpretation. There's places where you can only have kind of creativity and you don't want any kind of logic. And so it's a really interesting balance between these two things, and to see them come together is a really interesting space.
Okay, and we're right at time, but I'm just going to ask one last question to everybody on the panel. Are they worth the investment in time and effort?
Yes.
We need a budget for next year, so.
What's that, sorry, Vanessa?
We need a budget for next year.
We need to budget for next year, okay. So, but in general, definitely worth the time and effort to invest, both in training and in, obviously, the software itself, skills, everything. Okay, cool. So everybody with that, just thank you so much for attending, but please, a great big thanks for the entire panel. We are at time, so if there's any questions, we'll be just right outside there, so please feel free.
We're going to take a break for about 15 minutes and reconvene here around 3:45 for our next session on creating tailor-made generative AI platforms.